This is a presentation that's going to talk about Control 20, which is out west, along with the Canal network E-1W South and L-43W. And we wanted to look at some potential improvements in the valuations. Over the past 20 years, concerns have been raised by local communities over the design and operation of that system, Control 20, and the associated canals. And the concerns generally cover flood control issues associated with Boca Green's development. There have been criticisms of the system's operation and design that go back to the 1980s. When I got here and I went through the file, I found a letter from Mr. Norman Weiss, and he's been sort of the most vocal resident of that area, to the Water Management District. And it was the letter was written in 1992 to Tony Waterhouse, and the first sentence was, "Tony, it's been a long time since we talked." So the debate about this area has gone back into the 1980s. So it's been around for a little while. And when I got here, I said, well, let's take a look at it and find out factually what's going on, if anything. Also, over the past 30 years, there's been a trend to conversion of land use from agriculture to urban and suburban uses. And in spite of those changes, there really hadn't been any change to the water control operations needed. The water management plan for this area was completed in 1984. Mock Roos did the study, and they did minor revisions in 1992 and 2014. This basin, and you can kind of see it in the map, it's colored tan. That's the drainage area that we're talking about, and you can see Boca Green's the red rectangle. It discharges south to the Hillsborough Canal, and then once it gets into Hillsborough, it goes east and discharges to the Intercoastal Waterway. The design event, rainfall event, around 10.5 inches. It's statistically a 1 in 10 year event over a 24-hour period. And there's a little closer view of it. Again, you can see it goes north to the, I think it's L-38, the canal with the 30, with 30. And then south all the way to the Hillsborough. But there's a portion south that doesn't drain to the Lake Worth Drainage District. You can see it's white, and it just drains directly into the Hillsborough. So we're only talking about that area in tan. Here's another view of it, and you can see the red canals are canals that are controlled around 16, elevation 16. The blue canals are around 13. And then the orange canal to the south there, south of Control 20, is 7.5. So the elevations step down as you go from east to west and west to south. So there's no real opportunity for us to discharge any of this water east, because you'd have to have pumps to pump it from 7.5 up to 16. So I just made this little map just to show you kind of the specifics of the area. The red lines show you the E-1W South and L-43W. The blue arrows kind of show you which way the water flows. We got a couple of those green dots there. Those represent the monitoring stations that we installed a couple of years ago that we've been using to keep an eye on things out there. One of the interesting things that occurred relative to this evaluation was on June 6th of 2017. We had an rain event that came very close to the 10-year, 24-hour event. So you can kind of see how the system performed and what happened. And so that yellow circle is kind of where the district is, and the southern portion of it, you can see the kind of pink and purple colors, and that represents somewhere between 8, 10, 12 inches of rain. So you kind of bracket that 10.5 design storm. An important thing to note here, most of that rain fell south of us, but it still had an impact on the basin. And this is a graphic from South Florida Water Management District during that event, and I highlighted in a red box there the plot we're looking at. That is the elevation in the Hillsborough Canal just downstream of our canal. And it started out around 8.5, which is pretty normal for a wet season. Jumped up to 9. 9 is starting to get a little high. It then, when the rains really hit, it jumped to 10.5, which is really high for us in the Hillsborough Basin. But it even went higher, it went to 11.5. So that was pretty concerning to us all. I went and just for fun looked at the historical record. The record for S39 goes back to 1986, and there were only 2 events that exceeded 11.5. The event we're talking about here, and one back in 1999. My guess is that was Tropical Storm Irene. But anyway, so we don't get this type of condition very often. When we looked at Boca Green's design, their outfall, this is just a little graphic showing their weir plate. And their control was at 12.5. They had a storm weir designed at 13.5. Their design tailwater, the water that they assumed downstream of their structure in the L-43, was 11.75. When we did our modeling in the 80s, we came up with a design tailwater of 14.75. So that's 3 feet higher. And you can see it's much higher than their weir. They rebuilt their weir in 1990 because it had some structural problems. And they literally just cut the top off. So they got some more capacity that way. But you can see that there'd be many times between 14.75 and 12.5 that the water in our canal would be higher than the water in their development, and that could cause some concern. Fast forward to this recent event, I'm going to focus your attention to the blue line and the red line. The blue line is the water levels above Control 20, north of Control 20. The red line is water levels south of Control 20. And you can see coming in the storm is a big difference, remember, because we were holding water levels upstream of 20 at 13.5, and you've got water downstream somewhere between 7.5, 8 or so. And then when the storm started pushing water levels in that red line up to 9, and we started seeing water levels upstream of 20 starting to climb towards 14, we opened Control 20, and that's where you see that red line jump up really, really high. That's because we opened the gate, more water's coming in the canal goes up. And those 2 lines track pretty close to one another through the peak of the storm, again, in excess of 14 to 15 feet. And then when the rain, by the way, the rain is those purple and green lines at the bottom of the graph. When the rain finally subsided, you could see where the water levels upstream of 20 and downstream of 20 kind of came right together, and we're going down again because we're discharging. There's no more rain. And then that Friday, we closed 20, and then the 2 separated again. Upstream jumped up because we got it closed. Downstream dropped because no more water is being added. And that's generally how the system works. And the folks in Boca Green would love it if we never opened Control 20. Of course, the problem with that is, when you go back and look at the map, the problem with that is there's a number of developments upstream of Control 20 that rely on it for flood protection. So if we just kept 20 closed, we're going to potentially impact other developments to the north. So we're on this kind of razor's edge, and we're constantly balancing the benefit to one development against potential impact to another. Okay, so here's some photographs. Bob and I did a little reconnaissance the day after the storm, and this is Boca Chase. And what you'll notice, and I reported it to the board after that event, and it was true for pretty much every development from the Hillsborough Canal north to Atlantic Avenue. Every development had, their lakes were full, their green open areas were full, and there was water in the low spots of the roadways. Every development was like that. when you go over and look at Boca Green, same situation, but their situation took longer to recover because they're in the back end of the system. Their water's got to go south into Hillsboro, and then it's got to make its way all the way to the coast from 441. So because of that, it took them a little while to recover. But you can see there's Boca Greens there. And again, the high spots in the road are fine. Low spots, they had about 6 inches of water there. The lakes, and you can see there on the left, the open spaces, green areas, they were all underwater. And that's how the systems are designed. They're supposed to function that way. You know, when you don't have your 10-year event, right? Water goes in the lakes come up, sit there for a little while, and slowly goes down, waiting for the next storm. Recharging the system, right? When you get those design events, you expect the lakes to be full, you expect the green areas, the open areas to be full, and you expect there to be water in the streets. But the good news is there's no water in the houses. And this event played out exactly like that. We had no... It's a Turanian, same situation. Symphony Bay again, lakes full. Lakes full, low areas wet. Our canal was flowing as fast as it could. This is a picture of the south end of E-1W South at the Hillsboro. Yeah. And there's culverts that go underneath the South Florida Water Management District right of way, and they were unobstructed. They're old; they need some work, but they were flowing fine. And we had a little bit of vegetation, but the guys had gone there and cleaned that up before this photo was taken. Asked Macruz to do a study. We budgeted and paid them about $125,000. Here's just a graphic that kind of shows you the two structures. The one on the left is Control 20. It's just a metal sheet pile structure with 3 operable gates. On the right, you've got the culverts underneath the South Florida Water Management District right-of-way. I think they're 84-inch, and there's 3 of them. Control 20 was constructed in 1987 by Lake Worth Drainage District, so it's 30 years old. We've never had any operational failures noted with that structure. It's old and it's beat up, but it works. It was not included in the current SCADA system, mainly because there's no commercial power there. We would have had to run commercial power, so we kept that out of the SCADA project. There's some structural issues. We've got bent or deformed gate stems that need to be replaced. There's some delamination of the sheet pile at the water line on the low water side. About 1/3 of the thickness has been lost to corrosion. So that's something that we may need to look at fixing. Here's some photographs taken back in 86, 87 when the thing was built. And then today, that's what it looks like. You have 3 slide gates that are manually operated. So when we say we want to go out and open the gate to keep areas from the north from flooding, we got to send somebody out there in a truck, and they got to take a water reading, and then they got to open the gates. Some of the structural solutions, obviously we'd like to replace the gates and mechanical operators with stainless steel systems. We'd like to add automated gearboxes associated with the SCADA system and provide electrical power so we could run these remotely. There is commercial power not too far from the site, and we have been in discussions with FP&L on bringing that to the site so we can power the structure. We also want to look at constructing reinforced concrete facing near the water line to protect that exposed sheet piling from further deterioration. Macruz estimated the construction for all of that to be around $760,000. We looked at a hydraulic capacity of Control 20 and the culverts at the Hillsboro, and that evaluation indicated that sufficient hydraulic capacity exists for both structures. So from the standpoint of the size of the structures, they are not resisting water flow in any real significant way. So there's no need to replace the structures based on water conveyance capacity. When you look at the culvert crossing down at E-1W South in Hillsboro, those things are old, they're not in great shape, but they're not failing right now. I mean, they're not in a condition of failure. But we would like to replace them and construct a reinforced concrete box culvert to really maximize the movement of floating vegetation. That way you don't have to worry about floating vegetation getting hung up in them. And the construction estimate for that is around $1.2 million. And I zoomed in on that area just to kind of show you. That dark blue line is the L-40 levee and borrow canal system that's in the refuge. That levee is now a federally authorized dam. And it's intended to meet federal dam standards, which are very stringent. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the conveyance capacity of the canal. And if we were to do any dredging work in this canal, would likely involve potentially blasting, because there's a lot of rock down there. Blasting's going to potentially have an impact on the federally authorized dam and possibly all the homes adjacent to us there. So that's something you gotta keep in the back of your mind. So when we looked at the hydraulic capacity of E-1W South and L-43, the evaluation was focused mainly on potential impacts to upstream communities like Boca Greens, etc. The original design sections indicate, like I mentioned earlier, that water levels could get as high as 14.7 in the design storm. Now what this graph represents is kind of a slice of the cake going on. Now you look at E-1W South, you get a little bit of a different story. Again, the yellow line is the bottom. The left side of the graphic is north of Control 20. The right side of the graphic is south of Control 20, right at the outfall onto Hillsboro. And you can see where I circled in red the slope of the hydraulic gray line. It's kind of steep in that one area, which means the canal may be a little too small. So we went and looked at the design sections, and what we found for that section was that they dug about 3/4 of it, and they left the western quarter to a third alone. We asked Mock Roos to look at the hydraulics and tell us, well, how much better off would we be if we dug that area out? And so they did that, and they did two analyses. They dug the whole ditch wider, and then they just dug that reach wider. And what you see is that yellow and green dash line below the dark blue line. And what you see is,
Didn't really do much.
yeah, water levels upstream came down about a 1/2 foot. Water levels downstream of Control 20 dropped almost 2 feet. And so you go, well, that's pretty significant, right? And again, that arrow highlights the limits of that smaller area that we were looking at. But we said, well, wait a minute, that's great. It lowers the canal elevation, but what about Boca Greens? What about the developments? Does it help them? And you got $4 or $5 million if you decide to widen that canal. You do get some benefit in the canal prism. Water levels will be a little bit lower. But when you look back in the developments, it doesn't change them very much.
No, because of the friction.
Because they've got storage built in their system.
Yep.
And their storage handles the rainfall that falls in their development. And so those top two lines, the green line, the blue line, one of them is with no improvement, which is the top line, and then the bottom one, which is the green lower line, is with improvement, and there's virtually a 1/10 of a foot difference. And our recommendation to you is that we don't worry about widening the canal. We focus on the water control structures because they're old and they need repairing, and we can, by automating them, we can react faster and do a better job of managing the water.
Tommy, I appreciate this, and
Yes,
I
sir.
think this is just knowledge for the board. And,
Yes, sir. Correct.
And we'll carry this forward to another discussion.
We will come back around budget time and talk to you.